On the card, it was just another book. Shelf number, title, author, checked out, returned, checked out again. If you glanced at the library ledger, History of a 19th Century Trade Routes was as boring as its cover. But in the winter of 1978, in the reading room of a neutral city library that both sides liked to pretend was just a library, that book started moving in a way that made the head librarian feel like someone had taken her catalog and turned it into a code. By day, the central library smelled like dust, paper, and wet wool. Students hunched over exam notes. Children whispered in the corner, fingers sticky with candy despite the signs. Old men read newspapers like oracles. By night, after closing, it was hers. Shelves creaked softly as they settled. Heating pipes clicked. Outside, the trams rattled by, flashing bars of light across the tall windows. Her name was Helena. 48, thick glasses. Hair pinned up in a style that hadn't changed since the early 60s. On paper, she was Head Librarian, Central Branch. On the street, she was invisible, another middle-aged woman in a dark coat carrying a bag full of keys. In the eyes of a few men in a certain office, she was something else entirely, a quietly reliable piece of infrastructure, not for spy networks, for order. If the library was a nervous system of the city's brains, Helena was the one who made sure no synapse misfired. The only thing that truly bothered her was when the numbers didn't behave. And in December, one of them stopped behaving. The trouble started with a late fee. On a Monday morning, she opened the returns drawer and frowned. No red book. Shelf 8, row C, slot 14. History of 19th Century Trade Routes. It was due back Thursday. Most people returned books on time. Books were serious things here. Paper wasn't cheap. You didn't hoard it unless you had something to hide. She checked the ledger. Borrower, card, 41Sef82. Name, Hans Kramer. Address, pension, Alpenhof, a tourist. One of the quiet ones who spent days in the reading room, eyes moving over pages instead of shop windows. He had a small notebook, wrote with a fountain pen, always asked for the same corner seat near the big map of the world. He'd checked out 3 books that week. He'd returned 2. It irritated her. Not because of the fee, because it meant a gap, a missing piece on the chessboard. Helena wrote a small red L, late, in the margin beside his card entry. Not because she liked punishing people, because the system only worked if it reflected reality. Reality, at the moment, said, "The book is not here." The book came back on Tuesday, not with Kramer. With the evening shift student, Anna, who dropped it on Helena's desk with a shrug. "Found in the returns slot," she said. No card, someone just pushed it through. The red cover looked normal, no bent spine, no torn pages. Helena opened it anyway. She always did, with late books. People tended to leave themselves inside them. Train tickets, pressed flowers, shopping lists that said more than they meant to. The inside cover bore the familiar stamp. Central Library, property of the city. The borrower's slip was tucked in its envelope, the last line reading 41Sef82, due 07/12.78, not returned. Helena crossed out not. She flipped through the pages, no scribbles, no folded corners. On page 263, a faint impression in the margin caught her eye. Not ink, pressure. Something had been written there and removed. She tilted the page to the light. On the creamy paper like a ghost, 37. Maybe part of a phone number, maybe nothing. She told herself it was nothing. She still took out her pencil and copied the indent onto a scrap of paper by shading it lightly. A habit she'd learned years ago, when she was young, and the city's police had once asked her if any of the foreign gentlemen ever left notes in the books. They had back then. People left everything in books. Letters, money, one time, a passport. Helena kept out of that now, mostly. She reshelved the book that night, shelf 8, row C, slot 14, trade routes, red spine, back where it belonged. She logged the late return, charged the fee to Kramer's card, and forgot about him. For 3 days. On Friday, she checked the weekly circulation report she still prepared by hand, because computers were slow and their printouts were ugly. Most books moved in messy patterns. Students swarmed certain titles at exam time. Detective novels disappeared and reappeared like migrating birds, but there were always outliers. Books that shouldn't be popular suddenly were. Shelf 8, row C, slot 14 had 3 lines that week. Kramer, Hans. Then, 2 days after the red book slipped back through the slot with no card, 55219, Kovar, L. Address, Hotel Danubia. Helena paused. Kovaj. Middle-aged man, dark suit, asked for foreign newspapers, polite to a fault. She pictured him, hat in hand, requesting something on trade in accented German. She checked the timestamp. He had taken it out 30 minutes after she'd put it back. People chose books in bursts. A student saw someone with a thick volume and thought, that must be on the exam. But tourists with hotel addresses and foreign newspapers didn't usually follow each other's reading habits so closely. Her pencil made a small dot next to the title in the circulation sheet. Just a dot. A personal mark that said, "Pay attention here." Over the next 2 weeks, the Red Book developed a life of its own. It never stayed long. It was rarely on the shelf when she did her late-night rounds. Every time it came back, the ledger said someone new had taken it. They all had different names, different addresses, different handwriting on their card applications. Almost all of them had 2 things in common. They were registered as staying in hotels, and they never borrowed anything else. Helena began a separate list in the back of her notebook. Not official, just date, time, card number, name, 41782, Kramer, Alpenhof, 55019, Kovaj, Danubia, 56301, Martin Shaw, Hotel Imperial. The quotation marks were hers. She put them around names that felt like they belonged on the covers of cheap spy novels rather than real people. She wasn't naive. She had lived through enough of the last 20 years to know that her city was a useful place to be no one in particular. Men in raincoats liked neutral ground. They liked coffee houses, train stations, and places full of quiet foreigners. They liked libraries, not because they cared about books, but because books came with catalog systems. Systems gave structure to things that wanted to move unnoticed. The pattern settled slowly, like dust. Always the same book. Never kept more than 3 days. The borrowers never renewed it. They never asked for help finding it. They walked straight to shelf 8, row C, slot 14, as if someone had already told them the path. If it was out, they did one of 2 things. Left, politely, after glancing at their watch as if they'd remembered an appointment. Or sat down with a random book until it came back. Helena started paying attention to those who sat. She had good eyes behind the thick lenses. In a library, the smallest movements were loud. Men who came for the trade routes book always sat near the tall windows at the far end. Seats 27, 28, 29, the ones with a clear line of sight to the main door and the newspaper rack. They turned pages slowly, too slowly. They watched reflections more than text. Once, from the return desk, she saw a man in a beige coat take something flat and pale from the book and tuck it into the folded newspaper he'd arrived with. He left the book on the table without checking it back in. Anna collected it 10 minutes later. Helena, pretending to tidy, picked it up and flipped to the middle. Between pages 262 and 263, someone had placed a very thin sheet of wax paper. On it, faint letters pressed into the surface, like the ghost writing she'd seen before. When she smoothed the paper in the light, she could make out a series of numbers and 2 initials, K 7 14 5. She had no idea what it meant. She knew exactly what it was. The nervous system of her library, the wires of index cards and shelf numbers and borrowers' ledgers had been repurposed. Someone had laid another system on top of hers, invisible unless you watch the right place for long enough. She closed the book. She slid the wax paper back where she'd found it. She put History of 19th Century Trade Routes on the reshelving cart with all the other volumes and pushed it toward the stacks. Halfway down the aisle, she stopped. On the wall beside the door to the staff room, there was a small, unremarkable metal box. It had been installed 5 years ago, when the city decided that all important buildings should have a direct phone line to the Ministry of the Interior's liaison office. Emergencies, they had said, fires, broken windows, disturbances. She had used it once when a drunken man had refused to leave. The officers had come quickly, taken him away gently, apologized for the trouble, thanked her for maintaining order. She stood by the cart, one hand on the red book, one eye on the metal box. The sheet of wax paper between pages 262 and 263 felt irrationally like heat. It would be simple to pick up the receiver, simple to say, "There is a book that never stays on its shelf, and men who like hotels and newspapers keep asking for it, and I think my catalog has turned into something else." Simple and complicated. She imagined what would happen if she said it out loud to the wrong ear, the library crawling with men in gray suits, shaking out every book, scaring off every foreigner who just wanted to read in peace. The trade routes book taken away for analysis. Her reading room turned into an interrogation room. Her staff questioned. Her own notebooks seized. She took a breath. Exhaled. Then she pushed the cart past the phone and into the dim rows of shelf 8. She would watch a little longer. Not because she liked secrets, because she believed in complete stories. She wanted to know what the pattern really looked like before she handed it to people who only cared about conclusions. That night, after closing, she took the trade routes book to her office instead of leaving it on the shelf. She locked the door. The key turned with its familiar heavy click. She placed the book on her desk, next to the green-shaded lamp and the neat stack of circulation sheets. Outside the tall window, snow had begun to fall, soft and steady, turning the avenue lights into blurred halos. Helena opened the book to the middle. Pages 262, 263. The wax paper lay where she'd left it. She lifted it gently and slid a blank sheet underneath. She shaded the surface with the side of her pencil, the way she'd done as a young assistant when a detective had shown her how to pull words out of impressions left on a pad. Numbers emerged. 3, 1, 7, 9, then a slash, then more. K 7 14 5, B 3 22 4. Each line paired a letter with 3 numbers. She recognized the pattern more than the content. Letters could be shelf codes. Numbers could be row, slot, edition. Library brains thought in such structures automatically. She took a clean piece of paper and wrote K, B. Underneath, she wrote the shelf layout from memory. Section K, Politics and International Relations. Section B, Biography. Row 7, Slot 14, Book 5, Row 3, Slot 22, Book 4. Her hand moved faster now, ink catching up to thought. The trade routes book wasn't the message. It was the bell. The real messages were elsewhere on the shelves, waiting in K and B and who knew where else, disguised as boring volumes nobody checked out unless they were told exactly which number to pull. The ledger stopped being a list. It became a map. She sat back in her chair, pencil still in hand, and realized 2 things at once. Whoever had built this system loved catalogs as much as she did, and if she didn't do something soon, her library was going to show up in a report with the word "Operation" in its title. She reached for the phone on her desk. Not the emergency box on the wall, the normal line. She dialed a number she hadn't called in years. When the man on the other end answered, his voice was older than she remembered, but the tone was the same careful calm. "Ministry Liaison Office. Good evening," she said. "This is Helena, head librarian at Central. I believe I have a cataloging problem you may want to hear about." There was a pause. Then, "Is this about late returns?" he asked dryly. "In a manner of speaking," she said. "Yes. Some of our books seem to have acquired extra readers." Another pause, the kind that said he had just sat up straighter. "Very well," he said. "We will visit you after closing tomorrow. Please keep your problematic volume safe until then. And, Helena?" "Yes?" "Don't mention this to anyone else, even in the staff room." She hung up and sat in the pool of green light, the red book open in front of her, the wax paper like a thin layer of ice between her catalog and someone else's. The reading room below her office was dark now. Empty tables, silent shelves, but in the ink patterns of her notes, in the numbers on the page, the library no longer felt like a quiet refuge. It felt like a machine someone had been quietly rewiring for years, using her own system as the skeleton for a code she had not been invited to read. Tomorrow, people who thought in arrests and informants would step into her world of call numbers and margins. She wasn't sure which side she disliked more: the invisible hands leaving ghosts on paper, or the visible ones that would come to wipe them away. The men from the ministry arrived without sirens. No black cars, no uniforms. Just two middle-aged coats walking up the library steps at 5 minutes past closing, as if they had overdue books to return. From the street, it looked like nothing. Inside, to Helena, it felt like the catalog had just grown teeth. They introduced themselves in her office, under the green lamp and the gaze of a faded portrait of some long-retired mayor. The older one had the same voice as the man on the phone. "Jan Vesely," he said, showing an ID wallet just long enough for politeness. "Liaison Office. This is my colleague, Petter." Petter was younger, 35 at most, tidy hair, quick eyes. Helena noticed one thing first. Neither of them smelled like cigarettes. Most men from ministry smoked as if it was part of their job description. These two smelled like cold air and office paper. "Thank you for seeing us after hours," Jan said. "You mentioned a cataloging issue." His mouth almost smiled on the last phrase. Helena opened the drawer of her desk and took out the red book. "History of 19th Century Trade Routes," she said. "Shelf 8, row C, slot 14. Or at least it used to live there before it grew legs." She placed it in front of them as if it were a specimen on a tray. Jan looked at the cover, then at her. "Explain," he said simply. She did it the way she did everything, systematically. First, the ledger entries. She set the circulation sheet on the desk, tapping the line of names and card numbers. Tourists, hotel addresses, no other loans, always this book. Then the returns. The pattern: it comes back late, or via the slot, or abandoned on tables. Always just long enough for someone else to take it. Then the ghosts. She opened the book to pages 262, 263, and slid out the wax paper she'd kept between the sheets overnight. Under the lamp, the faint numbers showed through the pencil shading. K7 14-5, B3 22-4, she read. "My guess, section, row, slot, copy number, roughly how I'd write it if I were telling someone where to find a book without using its title." Petter leaned in, eyes narrowing. "Someone is leaving these," he asked. At least 2 someones, Helena said. One to write, one to read. The book is just the message board. Jan sat back. He didn't look surprised. If anything, he looked tired in a way that suggested this wasn't the first time someone had turned a piece of the city's furniture into a signaling device. What made you call us now? He asked. Libraries see strange readers all the time, foreigners, lonely men with notebooks. Why this? Helena tapped the wax paper. Because this isn't just strangers, she said. This is my system, my shelves, my numbers. Someone has built a second catalog on top of mine, and they didn't even ask permission. She took off her glasses, rubbed the bridge of her nose, put them back on. And because, she added quietly, the last time someone asked me about strange readers, it was 20 years ago, and they brought dogs. I thought if I called you before the dogs, perhaps we could avoid that. Jan gave a small, real nod. Dogs are expensive, he said. We use them only for very special occasions. Petter smiled tightly. Let's see what your ghosts are pointing to, he said. They walked the darkened stacks with the care of people in a church. Helena carried a ring of keys and the red book. Jan carried nothing. Petter held a small notebook and a pencil, though Helena suspected most of what mattered was going straight into some other ledger later. Section K first. Politics and International Relations. Row 7, Slot 14, Book 5. Helena ran her finger along the spines, counting softly. K7 14-5, she murmured. Here. She slid a volume halfway out. A thick, dull blue hardcover. Proceedings of the 1959 International Shipping Conference. Nobody had touched it in months. Years, maybe. Jan took it from her and opened it at random. Dry text, charts, footnotes, page after page of something only specialists could love. Looks innocent enough, Peter said. Most things do when they're useful, Jan replied. He thumbed to the middle. Helena, watching, felt like she was seeing someone leaf through a body looking for hidden bones. On page 312, the book changed. Only for 2 sheets. The paper there was slightly thinner, with a different texture, as if someone had replaced a section during rebinding. Jan pinched the edges and tugged gently. The page lifted. Underneath, in a pocket neatly cut into the binding, lay a small flat object wrapped in waxed paper. He slid it out with the care of a bomb technician. The bundle was the size of a matchbox, half as thick. He unwrapped it enough to see dark, glossy strips inside. Microfilm. He didn't unroll it under the shelf light. He rewrapped it and slipped it into his coat. Book K7 14-5, he said softly. Status compromised. Peter wrote, pencil scratching. Helena looked at the gap in the spine, the thin scar where someone had hollowed her book. How long has it been like that? She asked. Long enough to have fingerprints from every side of town, Jan said. We'll have to hope the people who did the cutting weren't as careful as the people using it. They moved on. Section B, Biography, Row 3, Slot 22, Book 4. This time it was a slim volume. Memoirs of a Provincial Mayor. Faded, unremarkable, the sort of thing old men checked out for comfort and students ignored. Helena opened it by habit to the title page. The ink stamp of the library sat there like a seal. Nothing unusual. She flipped deeper. Halfway through, a postcard fell out and fluttered to the floor. Petter bent to pick it up. A photograph of a mountain lake on one side. On the other, a simple message in neat handwriting. Greetings from home. The air is clear. The water is cold. M. No address, no stamp. Just the words, and along the edge, barely visible, a line of tiny numbers printed with a typewriter so faintly that without the lamp you might miss them. 27-19-4. Helena could feel the shape of a substitution cipher in the rhythm. Jan didn't bother to decode it there. He slid the card into an envelope, marked the book number, and put the envelope into his pocket with the microfilm. They went through the rest of the codes Helena had found. KB once, and M. Each sequence led to another book that had acquired a secret second life. A hollowed spine, a glued envelope at the back cover, a page that had been carefully split and rejoined to hide a thin strip of photographic emulsion. None of it was sloppy. None of it was random. Someone had spent years, maybe a decade, turning certain dead books into living drop boxes. The library had been quietly rewired, one volume at a time. Back in her office, Jan laid the red trade routes book on the desk and placed his palm flat on it. "This," he said, "is the bell. It rings, and people know which other shelves to visit. They never need to speak, never need to meet. They just need your catalog." Helena sat down. Her knees felt oddly weak. It wasn't the spy work that unnerved her. It was the disrespect. "Why here?" she asked. "You have post offices, parks, train stations. Why my library?" Petter answered before Jan could. "Because books move without suspicion," he said. "Because nobody notices when a man spends an hour in a reading room. Because your shelves are organized and someone on both sides of the border knows the plan of this building as well as you do." "Both sides?" she repeated. Jan looked at her. "In a city like this," he said gently, "it is rarely only one. One service builds the machine. After a while, another learns how to feed coins into the same slot." She thought of the variety of names in her list. German, English, Slavic. Different accents asking for the same red book. Her catalog, she realized, had become a common language for people who otherwise only shared suspicion. "What do you do now?" she asked. "Close it?" Peter's instinct showed on his face. Yes. Shut it down. Pull every compromised volume. Burn the hollowed ones. Put a normal, honest red book back on shelf 8 and forget any of this had happened. Jan shook his head slightly. "If we close it now," he said, "we save your catalog, we lose the people. I think we have all been blind to this for long enough. It would be a shame to wake up just to shut our eyes again." He tapped the wax paper with its K and B and M codes. "They built this to be quiet," he said. "Let's make it loud in our direction for once." He looked at Helena. "Can you tolerate some noise in your library for a few days?" She thought of men in raincoats crowding the reading room, of whispers in the stacks. She thought of the dog she'd once seen led down these aisles, nose low, tail stiff. She took a long breath. "I can tolerate it," she said. "I don't have to like it." "That," Jan said, "puts you in the same category as most useful citizens." They set the trap with the same tools the network had used: time, patience, and the illusion that nothing at all was happening. The red book went back to shelf 8, row C, slot 14 the next morning, as if it had spent a dull night on Helena's desk. The wax paper with the codes stayed inside. Jan and Petter brought their own people, not soldiers, just men and women who could sit at tables and pretend to read while watching reflections in glass. They spread out in the reading room like a quiet rash. One at the newspaper rack, one in the corner by seats 27-29, one pretending to dust shelves in section K, one in biography, looking for something for his uncle. To Helena's eye, they were obvious, like new books jammed into an old sequence. She wondered how obvious they looked to the people coming to use the system. Then she reminded herself that most men who believed in their own cleverness rarely believed in anyone else's. She took her place at the main desk, stamping return slips, answering questions, pretending her pulse wasn't a little faster. The day passed. Students came and went in clumps. A school group shuffled through, leaving fingerprints and smudges of excitement. At 3:10, the bell over the door rang, and a man walked in carrying nothing but a folded newspaper. Mid-40s, short dark hair, careful mustache, a hotel coat. Helena recognized the pattern before she recognized the face. Foreign shoes, local currency in his hand, eyes that scanned shelves, not titles. He filled out a registration card with neat, slow handwriting. "Name?" she asked. "Michael Rice," he said in passable German. "Hotel Europa." She slid him a card. "Card, 057134. He thanked her, smiled politely, and walked straight toward shelf 8 without asking where it was. There was nothing overtly suspicious about the way he moved. That was the point. Suspicion lived in the shortcuts, in knowing the geography before the map. Helena stamped a return, placed a book on the cart, watched the reading room in the reflection of the glass door into her office. Rice reached shelf 8, row C. His hand went unerringly to slot 14. He took out the trade routes book, opened it not at the beginning but somewhere in the middle, thumbed through until he hit pages 262, 263. He stood there, reading for exactly as long as a man might if he'd genuinely stumbled on an interesting passage about shipping lanes. Then he closed the book decisively, tucked it under his arm, and walked to seats 27-29 by the window. He sat, unfolded his newspaper, and placed the red book on top of it, spine up. In the window's reflection, Helena could see 2 of Jan's people adjusting their posture by a fraction. Nothing else, no whispers, no hand signals. The dance had begun. For 15 minutes, Rice pretended to read. He turned the newspaper pages slowly, as if savoring each line. Under the table, his foot bounced once, twice. Nervousness or impatience. Helena forced herself to check in a stack of student history books instead of staring. When she looked up again, the red book was closed. The wax paper was gone. Rice rose, stretched, and walked toward Section K. The reader, already standing in that aisle, shifted to let him pass, feigning disinterest. Rice ran his finger along the spines, just as Helena had the night before, counting silently. Row 7, slot 14, book 5. He pulled out Proceedings of the 1959 International Shipping Conference and opened it in the middle. He didn't take long. His hand dipped, pocketed something, closed the book, put it back. Then he moved on, casually now, to biographies. B322-4, the slim memoir, the postcard, another small slide into his coat. From the desk, Helena could almost hear Jan's mind ticking. Faces, times, card numbers, the house where this man slept. When Rice finally left, 23 minutes after entering, he did it the way tourists always left libraries. With a polite nod at the desk, a murmured, "Thank you," and no books in his hands. Outside, the air swallowed him. So did the people waiting for him. Helena didn't see the arrest. She heard about it in fragments later, in phrases Jan let slip like crumbs. Picked up 2 streets away. Car from the consulate followed him. Hotel room full of paper that didn't belong to him. She focused on what she could see. The way Section K felt emptier once the hollowed book was quietly removed and replaced with a normal copy from the storage depot. The way the red trade routes book sat on her desk again that night, this time with no wax paper inside. They ran the operation for 3 more days. Each time the red book moved, men in coats moved with it. Some of the people who came were obvious foreigners, some weren't. A local accountant, a woman who worked at a travel agency, a graduate student with ink on her fingers. The network, it turned out, didn't care about nationality. It cared about people who could be many things at once. Out of the names in Helena's notebook, Jan later circled 3. "These were ours," he said, or should have been, someone recruited them first. He didn't sound angry. He sounded annoyed, like a man whose favorite chess piece had been borrowed without asking. 2 weeks after the first visit, Jan came to her office one last time. No patter this time. No extra readers hiding behind newspapers. Just Jan in his coat, holding an envelope thick with developed microfilm copies and decoded postcards. He set the envelope on her desk without opening it. "We're done," he said, "at least with this version." "This version?" He shrugged. "Operations are like weeds," he said. "You pull one root, another finds the same soil. But this particular garden path is closed, for now." "Closed? How?" she asked. "We removed the compromised books," he said, quietly, replaced some, left others empty. The people who were using them will find only dust now. Some of them are having long conversations with us. Others have left the country in a hurry. One, unfortunately, found your city's river more convenient than our questions." Helena flinched. She hadn't wanted that detail. "Who built it?" she asked instead. Jan considered his answer. "In the report," he said, "it will say, 'Network likely initiated by Foreign Intelligence Service, later exploited by multiple actors.' And what will it say about the library?" He smiled thinly. "Unwitting infrastructure," he said. "A phrase we like very much. It spreads blame nicely." He pushed the envelope a little closer to her. "These are copies," he said. "Stripped of anything classified, codes, pages, the bits that concern your catalog. Consider them professional reading." She raised an eyebrow. "You want me to catalog an espionage operation," she said. "I want you to know what your shelves have been used for," he replied, "so that next time, perhaps, you will see the pattern even sooner." That night, after he left, she stayed late. The building creaked as it cooled. Snow tapped against the tall windows. She opened the envelope. Inside were blown-up frames of microfilm, copied pages from hollow books, transcripts of decoded postcards. They were surprisingly dull at first glance. Dates, times, names. Instructions like grocery lists. Change contact point from K7-14-5 to K6-9-2. Stop using B3-22-4 after Tuesday. New courier will read in the window seats, brown briefcase, blue tie. This was what the fuss had been about. Not big secrets about missiles or ministers. Logistics, routes, schedules, the machinery behind the curtain. Once, 20 pages deep, she found her own handwriting. The neat columns from her circulation sheets, blown up and annotated in someone else's pen. Arrow. Notice pattern from here. Underneath, in different ink. Librarian is more observant than expected. Monitor. She stared at that note for a long time. Monitor. At some point in the last month, she realized, while she had been quietly observing her strange readers, someone else had been quietly observing her. The library, which she had always thought of as an extension of her own mind, had turned into a hall of mirrors. Readers watching shelves. Guards watching readers. Officers watching guards. And somewhere in the middle, between page 262 and 263 of a red book, the faint impression of K7-14-5 connecting them all. In January, the Trade Routes book disappeared from her catalog, not mysteriously, officially. A note from the acquisitions department said that due to wear and obsolescence, it was being withdrawn and replaced with a newer volume. Helena didn't argue. She took the old red book from the shelf one last time, stamped it, removed from circulation, and slipped it into a box destined for the pulping mill. Then she hesitated. Her fingers lingered on the spine. She thought of the men who had held it, the messages it had carried without ever knowing their content. It was, in the end, just paper and glue. The meanings had been layered on by people. That was what libraries were. Buildings full of neutral matter, constantly reprogrammed by whoever walked through the doors. She took the book out of the box. Instead of sending it to be shredded, she put it on the highest shelf of her office, spine inward, its title hidden. Not as a trophy, as a reminder. The new Trade Routes book came in a month later, glossy cover, updated maps, no hollowed spine, no ghosts on page 263. To anyone else, it was just a reference volume. To Helena, every time she saw its spine on shelf 8, row C, slot 14, it glowed faintly with the memory of how close it had come to turning her entire library into a police station. Years passed. The city modernized in fits and starts. Computers crept into the catalog room, humming softly, spitting out labels. The card drawers Helena had loved like children slowly emptied. Readers tapped keyboards instead of flipping index cards. The red book on her private shelf gathered dust quietly, its glued spine stiffening. Every now and then, a young librarian would find an old hollowed-out volume in storage and laugh at the idea that anyone had ever hidden films in book covers when one could simply carry a disc in a pocket. Helena smiled with them, then checked, out of habit, which section the book had once belonged to, and whether its absence had ever left a gap she hadn't noticed. On paper, the library was cleaner now. No late fees forgotten, no manual ledgers, no wax paper slips, just rows of numbers in a machine somewhere, counting everything. But when she walked the stacks at night, long after closing, listening to the shelves settle and the pipes tick, she could still feel the old pattern under the new one. A building full of coordinates, a system that could, with the right nudge, become something else entirely again. One evening, a young man at the desk asked her, half joking, "Do you ever worry that someone will start leaving secret messages in the system again?" She thought of Jan's envelope, of the line "unwitting infrastructure" in a report somewhere, of her own handwriting under someone else's annotations. "No," she said. He looked surprised. "No?" She smiled, thin and dry. "I don't worry," she said. "I watch." The young man laughed, not sure if it was a joke. He turned back to his computer. Helena went to reshelve a book, her fingers moving automatically along the spines, confirming that every title was where it should be. On the surface, her catalog was in perfect order. Underneath, she knew better than anyone that order was only ever one forgotten book and one curious reader away from turning into a code. Somewhere very far away, in a file drawer with a red stamp, there was still a case labeled "Use of Public Library as Secret Communications Channel." It told the story in numbers and names and dates. Helena's version lived elsewhere, in the feel of a red spine under her hand, in the memory of faint impressions on page 263, and in the quiet knowledge that even in a neutral city, no place full of stories is ever truly neutral at all.